Hello, happy late afternoon. We're going to start right on time. I'm Carlin Diamond, and I'm on the committee that puts this together for your amusement and amazement. Really happy to have you here. Thank you for sacrificing part of this gorgeous afternoon, probably in your gardens, for coming inside for a very important topic. Welcome to this, the 5th Town Hall meeting. This is the last in a series, and we will resume them September 21st. The agenda is on the whiteboard up here. This is the welcome. Then we'll introduce the speakers, and then there's about an hour for questions and comments, and then at 5:40 approximately, we'll have community announcements and refreshments. Thank yous for Mary Zellachild, first of all, for her articles in the Willits News and the Willits Weekly. And thank you to our local papers. They've been giving us wonderful publicity, and they remember to put the meeting on the calendar, even if I forget to ask them to. So our papers are wonderful. These City Hall chambers are made available to us free of charge. Kathy Saunders arranges for them for us. We're already on the calendar for next year. Dave Knudsen and the Grange, thank you for sound and sound system. Andy Wright and Al Rosen for video. This goes to Channel 3, so people that are at home can watch and later. Jed Diamond, thank you for helping us with chairs and tables and using your macho muscles. Our Town Hall Planning Group has been working very hard. Please stand if you're in that group. Mary Zellachild, Jane McCabe, April Twiddell, Jim Merrill, Kimball Dodge will be dashing in from work in a moment, Cindy Morninglight, and myself. We're open to having new people join us for the 2014-15 year, so speak to me or any of the other members of the committee if you'd like to help plan for town hall meetings this coming year. Now, our topic tonight, our community rights, what are they? Are we losing them? Brought up many questions in our group planning this evening about the ways that community rights might differ from personal rights. We tossed around some ideas about food, health, education, services of many types, as well as clean air, water, how decisions are made about how our tax money is spent by government and corporate structures. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in an address known as the Four Freedoms speech, in the State of the Union address, January 6, 1941, he proposed 4 fundamental freedoms that people everywhere in the world ought to enjoy. 1, freedom of speech. 2, freedom of worship. 3, freedom from want. 4, freedom from fear. This speech also contained, quote, as men do not live by bread alone, they do not fight by armaments alone. And in the second half of the speech, he lists the benefits of democracy, which includes economic opportunity, employment, social security, and the promise of adequate health care. It's 1941. The first 2 freedoms of speech and religion are protected by the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. The second 2 freedoms from want and fear went beyond the traditional constitutional values protected by the U.S. Bill of Rights and were known as, quote, human security paradigm in social science and economic development circles. Our rights were evolving and still are as we become less fettered with older ideological paradigms of what community rights are limited to. Here to stimulate our discussion for this town hall meeting are 4 people from our community who will speak to the topic as they see our community from their points of view. Karina McAbee Cotler, who has studied community democracy issues for 15 years and is very active in and has been a past Grand Master of the local Grange. Charlene Ford, a local rancher and businesswoman. Lynn Kennelly, Director of the Willits Chamber of Commerce, and Margaret Koster, co-chairperson of Mendocino County's Move to Amend Coalition. Let's give a good warm welcome to our 4 speakers.
Hi, friends and neighbors, and it's nice to see that we're all sitting on the same level here. Here in Mendocino County, we all are interested in local, and if something comes from around here, we pretty much support it. I wanted to bring your attention today when we were talking about community rights, about a draft rule that is out there called WOTUS, capital W, capital O, capital T, capital U, capital S. And it's an acronym for Waters of the United States, dealing with the Clean Water Act. It was published in the Federal Register, where it says it will come into effect at the end of the 90-day review period, and it would greatly affect all of us. It would go into effect if there's not lots of opposition. The 3 points that I'm going to talk about today in regards to this draft rule: number 1, a brief explanation of the contents; number 2, the dangers; and number 3, what each of us can do. So number 1, on April 21st, 2014, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps issued a draft rule dealing with the Clean Water Act, and it empowers their field staff of the agencies with the authority to make jurisdictional determinations on wetland with no oversight, except if there's a judicial challenge. The proposed definition of jurisdictional wetlands provides staff with the discretion to make such determinations without empirical evidence in support. So if one of their staff just went out and looked at a piece of property or just a little piece of dirt and said, oh, there's some water there, or it rained there, and then that's a wetland, it could become, go into effect. This is an attempt to make an end run around the 2 Supreme Court decisions which limited the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps of Engineers' authority under the Clean Water Act. Congress never intended to control all waters. The Constitution prohibits such broad federal regulations, and Congress stated in this original act that it would defer to the states when it came to land and water use in local areas. These agencies are running themselves and are accountable to no one. It's entirely too much power to give to the field staff of either one of the agencies. According to Carrie Fisher in Ag Alert, quote, if the EPA and the Army Corps finalize this proposed rule, virtually every area of ground that gets wet or has flow during rainfall could be regulated. What the agencies say would increase consistency and predictability only would head toward regulation of all waters, including most ditches, small and remote waters, natural or man-made drains where water flows only when it rains, all tributaries, intermittent and temporary waterways, wetlands that affect larger navigable downstream waters, and neighboring waters in floodplains and riparian areas. The word adjacent would cover both water and land, whereas right now it just talks about water. It applies to water. Now it only covers the adjacent wetlands, then it would cover the waters. So permit requirements that apply to navigable waters would also apply to most ditches, drains, small ponds, and even depressions in fields and pastures that are only wet when it rains. It is so broad that it also gives them the power to control grazing and burning within a wetland. Permits would likely be required for disking, pulling weeds, treating for weeds and insects. Even if a rancher or anyone, even a homeowner, gets the permit, it makes farming and ranching, and it would make just everyone's personal life much more costly and time-consuming. It takes months or years to get permits, which I'm sure we all know about different kinds of permits, and they often require reports to be turned in. So not only farmers and ranchers would be affected by WOTUS, but also individual citizens simply doing things that have been a normal part of life. This is only a brief explanation of the rule. There's tons. I got bunches of material about it. It would be really complicated. Number 2, now let's consider a few dangers of the rule. By developing this WOTUS rule, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps did not, this is the scariest part, they didn't have to follow the proper transparent rulemaking process that is dictated by the Administrative Procedure Act. Let's see, okay. A rule of this magnitude needs to go through a normal rulemaking process, not just dreamed up and put into effect. The Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps should not be given the right to make these regulatory changes without being subject to the legislative processes that we have in our country. This proposed WOTUS has massive negative implications, not only for the production of food and fiber in the U.S., but it'll affect every individual person, town, municipal, and state government simply by being put into effect without proper study and consideration of consequences to we the people. It amounts to a governmental grab of jurisdiction over private property engaged in agricultural production. Rather than adopting WOTUS, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps need to be placed under increased congressional oversight. So even, like now, or especially around here, people are catching rainwater and doing all those kinds of things. It would be under their control. In 2011, the Environmental Protection Agency and the Army Corps tried to pass a similar rule, but they never made it final because there was so much opposition. Now let's look at what we can do. I used a Farm Bureau publication and some things from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association for my reference material. There's contact information on how to contact congressmen if you want to comment. And also, if you do that, be sure you note, and I underlined it, be sure to note that without the docket number, they've tossed out the letter, so be sure you put that in and you'll see it when you take it. In this week's Ag Alert, there is an article that says that the changes to the Federal Clean Water Act are ambiguous and economically unsound. It is signed by about half of the members of the House of Representatives, including 13 members of the California congressional delegation, asking for these proposed changes to be dropped, so that's hopeful. The letter said the proposed rule, quote, aggressively expands federal authority over state waters under the Clean Water Act while bypassing Congress, and the proposal contradicts several Supreme Court decisions. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about this important topic. And finally, in closing, I would like to leave you with this thought. I'm from the government, and I'm here to help.
I don't think so. Well, I'm Lynn Kennelly, and, I'm happy to be here today. I did a lot of research on this. I talked to a lot of people, and, I asked the question, are we losing our community rights? And, of course, I had one thought, but somebody else verbalized it, and they said, well, duh. And I thought, yeah, that'd be great if I could just walk off with that, but I'm sure that that's not what you wanted to hear. I think most of you know who Jeff Foxworthy is. And, if you're a redneck, if you're, okay, well, you might be a terrorist if you're frustrated with with the mainstream ideologies. You're valuing online privacy or your personal privacy. Being a libertarian. Liking our founding fathers, being a Christian, being anti-tax, anti-regulation, or for the gold standard, being anti-nuclear, being reverent of individual liberty, belief in conspiracy theories, or a belief that one's personal and or national way of life is under attack, impose strict religious tenets or laws on society, insert religion into the political sphere, those who seek to politicize religion, being anti-abortion, being anti-Catholic, being anti-global, being suspicious of centralized federal authority, fiercely nationalistic, a belief in the need to be prepared for an attack either by participating in or survivalism, opposing, now this is, you're going to love this one, opposing genetically engineered food, opposing surveillance. And I thought, his stuff's funny. Mine wasn't funny. But on January 31st, 2012, the Department of Homeland Security Behavioral Science Division pointed out to the following indicators that I just read off as potential terrorism. As you know, some of those, when I read that list, the indicators are, both conservative, some are liberal, some are bipartisan. It's across the board, folks. It's all of us. I mean, really, the more I looked into this, the more I talked with people, it's everybody is suspect. And it's kind of scary. I mean, I don't like scary movies. I remember, and I was just telling Jim, growing up, I heard when I was about 6 years old, there was going to be this bigger and bigger shift between the haves and the have-nots. Here I am, almost 60, and I'll be darned. And I think we all, whatever political affiliation or whatever you want to call it, I think we're a community here. It has nothing to do with our politics. It has everything to do with the government and how they're treating we the people. The First Amendment rights, yeah, I'd say that we've lost a few of them. And they seem to be accelerating. And it doesn't matter if it's the research that I've done, it does not matter who's in power, who's in the president's seat, or who's in Congress. It's happened throughout history, and it's really, really unnerving. One of the other things that, and I guess, we had talked earlier about, when we were talking about trying to get me to do this, because I don't really want to do it, because I didn't feel that I was an expert in any way, shape, or form. But businesses, now they have, I just want to read you this. There is a training manual. It's called State and Local Anti-Terrorism Training, SLAT program for law enforcement, and funded by the Department of Justice. And it lists political bumper stickers as expressing, opposition to the United Nations in support of the Bill of Rights as indicators of terrorist activity, which is a little scary. Another flyer. And the flyer is aimed at basically, there's 25 different business groups that it's aimed at. And it was a 2009 report. It's a MIAC report published by the Missouri Information Analysis Center. Framed Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, people who display bumper stickers, who own gold, and even people who fly the American flag as potential terrorists. A flyer aimed at military surplus, which is actually produced by the FBI and the Bureau of Justice. One of them is aimed at military surplus stores. What's interesting about this is, as part of its effort to encourage business owners to spy on their customers, the FBI has labeled the bulk food purchase as a potential indication of terrorist activity. Now, that would have some Mormons in our community kind of up in arms, I'd say, despite the fact that FEMA itself purchased $1 billion, not million, but $1 billion worth of storable food. According to the flyer, the FBI advises store owners to demand IDs from all new customers, as well as asking them questions about their purchase and being aware of suspicious statements. The flyer also characterizes, now you're going to love this in Mendocino County, paying with cash or, God forbid, demanding identity privacy as an indication of terrorism. There is a collection of 25 flyers, which I have some here that I actually ran off. And they're produced, like I said, by the FBI and the Department of Justice. They are distributed to local businesses in a variety of industries to promote suspicious activity reporting. The flyers are not released publicly, though several have been published in the past year's media and to the law enforcement agencies around the country. And let me just read you the list of these so-called threat areas. Airport service providers, beauty drug suppliers, bulk fuel distributors, construction sites, dive and boat shops, electronic stores, farm supply stores, financial institutions, general aviation, general public, and I love this one, hobby shops, home improvement, hotels and motels, internet cafes, shopping malls, martial arts, and, God forbid, paintball, mass transportation, military surplus, peroxide explosives, rental cars, rental properties, rental trucks, and storage facilities, and the really kicker one, tattoo shops. I'm not a farmer, even though my family in Minnesota, they are. People that know me know that I probably have what they call in the industry a brown thumb. Okay, so that being said, if I go into a farm supply store and the farm supply store has this flyer here, and it says on the flyer, Communities Against Terrorism, Potential Indicators of Terrorist Activities Related to Farm Supply Stores. What should I consider suspicious? What should I do? I guess I'm being a little condescending, aren't I? Sorry. Okay. I looked down this list and I went, oh man, I'm already a terrorist. Possessing little knowledge of crops, soil composition, field size, application methods, or fertilizers. That would be me. I'm going to pull Ellen Drell in here for a minute. And back in, I think, 1997, I went to their house and we canned tomatoes. And I don't think she knew what she was getting into. And she said, oh, come on out, Lynn. We'll have a great time. We did have a great time. But I think she really the cat was out of the bag. She knew, that I really wasn't a canner or farmer. Appearing to be interested only in ammonium nitrate, displaying no interest in alternative fertilizers or fertilizer combinations. Making suspicious inquiries regarding equipment, tank size, spray range. Well, now think about that. If I'm in there and I'm looking at some, I don't know what the heck is up or down with this, and I'm asking these questions. Does that really mean I'm a terrorist? Come on. Asking about acquiring vehicles equipped for spraying or hauling. Really? I mean, these are just, and they go on and on. This is a good one. Of course, we love it here. Using cash for large transactions or credit card in someone else's name. Now, who the heck do you think, if I'm a terrorist, I'm going to use somebody's credit card in somebody else's name? And they all basically say, similar things, but they hit home with this cash thing. If you're paying for cash at an internet cafe, you're suspect. Really? I was just blown away by this. And the more I looked, the more really fearful I was. I mean, it is all over. It crosses all boundaries, and it's amazing. I think you would probably agree that, I'm not too far off base with that, but it was just a real eye-opener, this whole experience, and I want to thank you, organizers, for pushing me to do this, because it opened my eyes, and I said, I'm a pretty positive person, and I really am about solutions, and this really bothered me because it's hard for me to say, I can't think of anything, and that bothers me. I mean, I'm always wanting to say, well, let's do this. Like Jim pointed out to me at the meeting, because I said, this is it's a real downer, when you start reading all of this stuff. And he said, well, Lynn, he said, it's about informing and educating people and putting the information out there that maybe they know or they don't know. And I have to say, well, that's very true. But again, because of my weird personality, I want to give you a solution right now, and I can't exactly do that. There is so much more. I mean, I don't want to take up other people's time, because I think everybody here on the panel has something, very relevant to say. I looked at all of the 10 amendments, and it's amazing what is happening and how they're being trashed. If you think this is bad, think about all of the internet security and how the government has got the backbone of the internet. I will, and I've got a ton of information on that, but I would like to leave you with thanking you for being here, thanking you for being a part of our community, and for your love and care of our community. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Margaret. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so my name is Margaret Koster, and I've been involved with Move to Amend for about 3.5 years. Move to Amend is a national organization, but I want to bring it down to the community connection. So I have complaints about the government as well. Some of them are the same, and some of them are different, and some of them I disagree. But if we can't talk and hear each other out and find common ground because somebody over there is out shouting both of us, then we've got a problem. And that comes down to the local level. And so now I'm going off my notes a little here too, stimulated by what you two had to say. So, part of the problem that Move to Amend sees is that, so the government is supposed to be composed basically of representatives that we choose. So it's a representative democracy. And the problem that we see is that corporations have figured out, not just corporations, but primarily corporations. So organizations that are composed of people, but that aren't people in and of themselves, have gotten the Supreme Court to say that because they're an artificial person under the law, then they're a person for purposes of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection to all persons. And it doesn't say natural persons or human persons. So that's been manipulated, and we need to fix that. So part of the problem with the government is that the government is operating for the benefit of the corporations and not for the benefit of the people in many, many cases, and it's getting worse. So it's a national organization, but it works through grassroots organization and local affiliates. So we have 2 local affiliates in Mendocino County, one on the coast and one here inland. We got together and collected signatures, which meant we had to go out and educate our fellow citizens one at a time. Got Measure F on the ballot, which was a citizens advisory saying we want the Constitution to be amended to say that a corporation is not a person with constitutional rights and that political spending is not free speech and we can regulate it. It's about education. It's about building up local political experience and capacity to gradually coalesce and push it into Washington. It's not going to come from Washington. It's going to be pushed into Washington by the people. So we have no office in Washington. We're not interested in having an office in Washington. There had been a number of people from various organizations that have been studying this problem of corporations having constitutional rights, or which is also referred to as corporate personhood. And when the Citizens United case was before the Supreme Court, and the Citizens United case was the one that took the limits off corporations' campaign spending. That case was before the court. Justice Roberts sent it back to the lawyers and asked them to expand their arguments so they could, that was a real signal about which way it was going to go. And so they said, this small group of people said, well, this is really going to get people excited. We should at least put a petition up on the internet. So they did, and the petition said, we move to amend the Constitution. It got so many hits, it crashed. So they said, all right, now it's time to start an organization. So that's how the organization Move to Amend got started in early 2011. Our goal is an amendment to the Constitution, a 2-part amendment, what I just said. One, that a corporation or other artificial entity, so it would include unions and nonprofits. Citizens United is actually a nonprofit. That's consistent. It isn't just corporations, it's any organization that is not an actual person, does not have constitutional rights, so that would be the first part of the amendment. And the second part would be that money is not speech. There's a lot of attention to Citizens United, and there are various amendment proposals out there that are all about the money as free speech and the Citizens United. So what we say is that's right and that's not enough. Because if all we do is overturn Citizens United, we'll go back to the fabulous democracy that we had on January 1st of 2010. Not good enough. So we're promoting ours. There is an amendment introduced into Congress called House Joint Resolution 29, the We the People Amendment. And just last month, our congressional representative, Jared Huffman, signed on as a co-sponsor to that. Thanks in part, and I will say without false modesty, to our efforts. So the other thing, a couple of other things I wanted to say. So the Move to Amend is one effort of many in the context of a growing democracy movement. There's a growing democracy movement in the United States with many streams feeding into it, and Karina will talk about a local effort. There is a democracy movement, so part of that is we all need to start thinking about, well, what is democracy? What does that mean? What's a working definition of democracy? One definition I heard of politics, I heard when I was a student, is what politics is all about is who gets to say and who has to pay. To me, the most practical, real-world way of knowing that I've been involved in a democratic process is if I get to participate in the decisions that are made about things that are important to me in my life. When the United States came into existence, the idea of a country being self-governing was radical and new. So our whole history has been an experiment in self-governance. It's gone off the tracks, I think, in a lot of people's opinion, but we can bring it back. And the other thing to think about is what is a right? To me, a right is something that you can do because you're a person. It's a human right, and you don't need anybody's permission. In the United States, our rights have been denied by law by the elected representatives of the people, but that was done illegitimately, slavery being the most obvious example, and then following slavery, Jim Crow. So rights can be, just because something legal is legal doesn't mean it's proper or right. But so to think about rights, I think it's really important. It's not just a word. And the same thing about democracy. And I think that some of these things are, we know, but we don't really think about that much. So if we're challenged, it's a little hard to say what we know. And I think it's important to think about those things. So that's another important thing that we're doing a Move to Amend is we're having some self-teaching things that we're doing and other things to really think about those basic questions. I have some literature out on the table. There's a petition, which if you sign it, will put you on the Move to Amend mailing list, and you'll be kept up to date about what's going on nationally as well as locally. Thanks.
Hi. Well, when I reflected on this afternoon's question, what are our community rights, I was thinking about the aspirations of our earliest Americans who were called to the revolution by the Declaration of Independence. They fought for the idea that government is created to secure our inalienable rights and derives its just power from the consent of the governed. In other words, a government to serve the people and the common good. The Declaration of Independence was the founding document that defined us as a nation. But there's a deep chasm between the corrupt system we know and the yearning for a just and compassionate society that I know lives in each of our hearts. We created the Environmental Protection Agency, we passed the Clean Air Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act and decades of environmental regulations, but we can see that things have only gotten worse. The best we seem to be capable of is postponing the inevitable destruction of the planet. Our system is clearly not working for the good of the people or for nature. And nature really is our life support system. If we were on a spaceship, would we allow anyone to pollute and destroy our life support system? But the fact is we are a little spaceship hurtling through space at 1.3 million miles an hour. And I think it's suicide for us to allow the destruction of our soil, air, and water for the profit of a few. But when people across the nation have stood up and said no to harmful corporate activities, they found that within the system, they don't have the right to say no. That the structure of law elevates corporate rights over human rights and the rights of communities and living earth. When the small hog farmers of Pennsylvania went to their state Department of Agriculture to say they didn't want these factory hog farms to come in and destroy their rivers and destroy their way of life, they found that the state would only talk to them about, well, should they manage the sewage from the factory farms? So what can we, the people, do to protect our health and the health of our land in the face of an unresponsive government? The community rights movement is one answer. It's given me hope that we, the people, have a remedy. a roadmap to take our country back. By creating a community bill of rights, we stand up as a community and declare our inalienable right to local self-government, our right to protect our health and safety, and to protect our watershed. We affirm our rights as fundamental and unalienable. What it boils down to is who should make the decisions about what happens in our county? The people who live here, or politicians and corporate CEOs who live hundreds and thousands of miles away? As Thomas Jefferson said, the issue today is the same as it has been all throughout history, whether man should be allowed to govern himself or be ruled by a small elite. Over 174 communities have taken their power into their own hands and passed a rights-based ordinance to protect their communities from fracking, factory farms, sewage sludge, toxic waste dumps, and the taking of water by bottling companies. In the past year, almost 100 people from all over the county attended workshops on dismantling corporate rule, and there's quite a few of us here in this room. Then 40 of us took CELDEF's Democracy School. CELDEF is the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Thank you. So we took this Democracy School this March, and we worked on this countywide ordinance that bans fracking based on a community bill of rights. So what is fracking? Fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, is a process of drilling deep into the earth, past the aquifer, and into a layer of shale, then drilling horizontally for thousands of feet and pumping a mixture of water, sand, and chemicals at such high pressure that it fractures the shale and releases the methane gas that's trapped within. Millions of gallons of this fracking fluid is injected into each well. Each well uses millions of gallons of water and 40,000 gallons of chemicals, none of which are required to be disclosed. But we know that arsenic, benzene, formaldehyde, lead, mercury, hydrochloric acid, radium, and uranium have been found in this fluid. The only thing that they are prohibited by law from using is diesel fuel. The fracking industry, thanks to Dick Cheney, is exempt from the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Air Act, and has loopholes in many other laws that were intended to protect us from exactly this kind of threat. So what are the dangers of fracking? Well, there's a handout out there that talks a little bit more about fracking if you want, but I'm going to cover a few. First, only 25 to 50% of the fracking fluid is recovered. The rest stays in the earth and can slowly seep up into the aquifer over time. The recovered fracking fluid is stored in lined pits, which evaporate and can leak, or it's injected deep into the earth and is suspected of causing over 1,000 earthquakes in states which rarely experience earthquakes. And it's interesting to note that I think it's called the Monterey Shale Formation. It goes all the way from Southern California through the Central Valley and up into the southern part of Mendocino County, and the San Andreas Fault runs right through it. The second danger is that the released methane that's not captured by the well pump can rise up towards the surface through the fissures and into the aquifer and then into people's wells. Well, methane is an explosive hazard, meaning your house or the well itself could explode, and it's toxic to humans. And with a special camera, if you watch Gasland 2, you'll see it, you can see huge clouds of methane pouring from the fracking wells and into the atmosphere. The third danger is that the fracking drills themselves are encased in cement, and according to the gas industry, over 5% of these cement casings fail immediately. And after 30 years, at least 50% of them will have failed and leaked. So if there are 1,000 wells in the county, within 30 years, at least 500 of them will be leaking methane and some undisclosed chemical soup into the ground and into our water. Especially in a time of drought, diverting water from agriculture to fracking is a really bad idea. And the health consequences are really bad too, and only beginning to be studied. But so far it's been documented to cause low birth weight, increase in birth defects, nosebleeds, severe headaches and rashes and lung problems. And 15 million Americans now live within a mile of a fracking well. And there are 1 million new wells planned for the next decade. We should all be aware that not only will our homes not be covered by our homeowner's insurance if there's a fracking accident, but if you consent to have a well on your property, you can be held personally liable for any damage caused by the fracking operation once the gas company leaves. So if we don't stand together as a community and ban fracking, then every one of us that's harmed by this activity is going to have to stand alone and defend themselves by themselves. Although the subject of our ordinance is banning fracking, we are claiming the right to ban fracking based on our inalienable rights, and that's why it's called a rights-based ordinance. To quote Shannon Biggs, one of our teachers from Democracy School, I think the difference in the approach we're using is that we're seeing the problem differently. We say fracking itself isn't the real problem. The problem is deeper than that. The problem is that someone else who doesn't live in Mendocino is deciding whether or not fracking comes our way. The community rights movement is about addressing the structure of law that says we're up for grabs, for corporate profit. We are asserting our human right to decide, and we're changing the law to put the decision-making into the hands of the community. We're laying the groundwork for saying no, not just for fracking, but to the idea that someone else can make these decisions for us. So soon you'll see us out about town collecting signatures for our ordinance. Please sign our petition when you see us out there. Remember, signing it doesn't mean you're going to vote for it. It just means that you're going to let us be on the ballot. And you'll have until November to decide. If you believe that life is sacred, then water is also sacred. So please vote for our ordinance this November and protect our precious water. As Thomas Paine said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. Let's do it.